My issue was on torture, and basically I was trying to investigate what was happening in the 21st century in terms of torture. But before we can proceed on that, we have to define the word torture itself. So in this presentation, we're going to define torture as any form of punishment, violence, any subjugation used towards somebody in order to extract information. That's the definition that the UN Convention Against Torture used in 1984. So that is the same definition that we're going to use. Torture has a lot of history in terms of around the globe, especially in the 20th century. So countries like Chile right over here, and Augusto Pinochet's regime, military regime, he used a lot of torture in order to get rid of any opponents that might have been communist or sympathetic towards communists. You have torture in Saudi Arabia, where anyone who opposes the conservatism in the country is imprisoned indefinitely. You have torture in countries in Latin America, like El Salvador and other countries which were strongly against communism following US military takeovers. Torture was also found in Spain, where, this Spain right over here, where the Franco regime, which was neo-fascist, they used any form of subjugation against anybody who was communist. Torture, however, has not ceased, because ever since the 21st century, we were expecting to see torture to be eliminated. Like, the UN Convention Against Torture was actually ratified, or there was 147 signatories for this. So a great majority of the world had supposedly signed against torture, yet torture remains a reality. It was, besides being in the 20th century, like in Argentina, in Chile, in Spain, in other countries, we still find it in the world. Like in the United States of America, you had the Patriot Act, which was signed by George W. Bush, where he established the rights to strip many people of their rights simply if they were accused of having any bonds or like ties with terrorist groups, even if this was unproven. You also had it in Canada, where we also embraced a similar type of doctrine like the U.S. And during the U.S. Military occupation of Iraq, we saw a lot of torture being used there. Also, we saw it in Afghanistan, right here, where both of these occupied countries had a lot of torture used in order to extract information from any forms of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Yet, this is the reality right now. But all these countries that we see here, they're signatories of the UN Convention Against Torture. They have all signed the Geneva Conventions. They all oppose torture in one way or another, yet behind the scenes, they are always guilty of committing these actions. So this is where my NGO comes in play. Human Rights Watch, it was an NGO which was formed in 1984. In 1987, it had the title Helsinki Watch, which is the capital of Finland. And basically, it was watching what was happening in Europe near the end of the Cold War, because there was a lot of human rights violations occurring, especially in Western Europe, where there was almost the possibility of a full-out nuclear standoff. So Helsinki Watch, they initially wanted to intend to only remain in the European spectrum, but following the Cold War, they had to broaden up their intentions and their goals and objectives. So now they have a far more general goal, which is Human Rights Watch. So they are basically watching for any violations that is occurring global-wide. So whether it's happening in Cuba, whether it's happening in Venezuela, whether it's happening in the United States of America or Canada, they are going to report it, regardless of whatever side of the spectrum the country is in. Their demarcation, it does not matter. So basically, my organization, they're concerned about exploiting what's happening in the United States of America. They want justice served, whether it was done by George W. Bush, whether it was done by Tony Blair, whether it was done by Dick Cheney. They want justice to be served. They have no biases. They are a non-political, non-profit group. They do not want to be appeased by other richer nations. So they really do have no bias of any sort. What I did basically was, in support of NGO and human rights, I formed, you could say, a miniature form of bake sale. I would call it to some extent that. And I give it the title Delights for Rights. So basically what I was doing was, I sold some, basically my intention was just to reach the goal of 25 by selling some cupcakes, cakes, outside with a friend,
Brownies.
kind of force some people to buy it out. It was a really like informal form of selling, but at the end I did reach my 25 goal. That was my objective, and after I reached it, I pretty much shut it down. I went home. It wasn't a yes.
So you said that you forced them to buy. So what tactics did you use to force them?
I actually, I was very frank. I was very frank about them. I told them that.
I'll kill them.
No, I was very frank. I told them that the world is in a dire need for it's in a really dire need of serving justice. We are in the 21st century. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of serving the rights of the people and presuming people to be innocent until guilty. So I was really frank with them. I told them that we have to, there's a lot of adjustments and polishing that we need to do in terms of the whole entire globe. There's a lot of work to be done. So, it did work out pretty well. When you sell cupcakes and cakes for 50 cents a piece, you need to only sell 50 pieces and you reach the 25 goal. So it didn't take pretty much a lot of time. So it was pretty mission accomplished for me. Any more questions? Yeah.
Can you reflect on Guantanamo Bay?
Guantanamo Bay, thank you. I was going to go actually on that. Guantanamo Bay, it's a minor base which is it is owned by the United States of America, and it is located in Cuba right here. It is used for alleged, I use the term alleged, suspects, people that were high profile, considered to be terrorists, and they are solitarily confined in that area until they're somehow freed of charge. They are not told of what they're accused of. They're subjected to a lot of torture. They have no rights at all whatsoever. They're not even told of their crime. They have no lawyers. Their lawyers are not even aware of the evidence being used against them. It's basically like the security certificates you have in Canada. So there's very, very, very little rights for those type of people that are in there, and it's very hard to get out. So yes.
What's the U.S.'s criteria to put someone in there?
The problem with that is because that is why in the beginning when I defined torture, I used the UN Convention Against Torture's definition. The problem with that is that the U.S. does not agree. Dick Cheney and the George W. Bush, they said that we will allow waterboarding. So waterboarding is basically, it's when you tie somebody down, you put them on their back, and you pour water on their face.
With like a thing open.
Yes. You pour water on them, and it simulates drowning. You feel like you're drowning. So the United States of America, when they signed the Patriot Act and other forms of amendments, they omitted this from being considered torture. So they do not define that as being an act of torture. So the problem with this is that countries, they will differ from their definition of torture. There are no shortage of fine words. Every country will say that, we want to do what's best for the interests of our country. They will always tell us that we oppose torture, yet behind the curtains, they're accused of doing a lot of stuff. Like the UN itself, it has a very fine charter, a very beautiful charter. It's kind of like the Declaration of Independence, yet 50% of its members themselves are guilty of torture. So it's really disgusting to hear that. Yep.
What's your NGO stance on North Korea, and do they say or do anything about North Korea?
It's very hard to have a stance on North Korea because there's a lot of media restriction. There's a lot of restriction on the media. We actually don't have a lot of information on North Korea ever since the Korean War ended in '53. So it's very hard to extract any information at all. All we know is that Kim Jong-il and his military junta, they're very, very restricted with media. We can't get enough information. We do know, however, that other countries that restrict the media, like Iran, they are also guilty of torture. They have a lot of prisoners, which they are solitarily confined, just like how we see it in Guantanamo Bay. So, sorry, in the U.S. you have a lot of Guantanamo Bays, basically, miniature forms of it. Any other questions? Yes?
Does the Human Rights Watch, do they actively pursue specific cases?
Yeah,
Do
so
they know of individuals who are held against their will?
yeah, of course. Like even in this September and October, the Human Rights Watch they were calling on Canada to arrest George W. Bush when he made a visit to Alberta. So like they actually demanded that the Canadian government arrest George W. Bush. And if you were to say something like that 5 years ago, somebody would say that you're crazy. You want to arrest the president of the United States of America. But after we saw what happened in the Serbian war, what happened to Milosevic, we could pretty much say that anything is possible. So Human Rights Watch has that philosophy. Just like its sister organization, Amnesty International, they're very active against anybody, regardless of which country it is, democratic or otherwise. They don't care. They will exploit you.
And kill you.
Yes?
Do you consider solitary confinement without just like you being imprisoned and being solitarily confined without like due process? Do you consider that a form of torture?
Yeah, you do. I do, because it does to some extent violate the Geneva Conventions, where prisoners of war should have access to speaking with their family. They must be entitled to having at least once a month a member of the Red Cross come to visit them. Like I remember when Victor, he was giving his presentation on Gilles Shalit. He was talking about how he didn't have access to any form of Red Cross members coming
Yeah,
to
but that's because it was a terrorist group.
I really don't care about the demarcation. Regardless of the organization, they must to some extent give some respect to they must give some respect to human, regardless of whether they agree with you or not in your philosophy. Yeah.
All right, can I make a point?
Yeah.
First of all, if he were to be given these rights,
Cool.
all of these, okay, if Gilad Shalit were given these rights to have, Red Cross, everybody, all of his captors would have been dead within, a week of the Red Cross coming over there. Because they would have figured it out.
Infiltration always
They're
leads
trying
to
to keep them,
I wouldn't agree with that. I know I'm gonna get a little off topic, but Hamas, they're an organization which has a lot of cells. They have cells that are in the West Bank, East Jerusalem. They even have some military activity in the Golan Heights, close to the border around there. It's impossible to eliminate a group like that. I'm gonna be honest.
I'm just saying they would have found it.
No, I'm gonna
That's
be
why
honest.
in that situation,
I'm gonna
they
be
kept him a secret, at least his location. And also,
Oh my
the
gosh,
organization,
shut up.
right? Are there any cases where they've actually done some good, where they actually got some leader or anybody like that?
Well, they were-
Any precedent?
They were very instrumental in opposing Milosevic in the Serbian war, where there was ethnic cleansing against Bosnia. So there have been cases where they have been successful, and they were very critical of the apartheid regime in South Africa right here.
So they just judge everyone most of the time. They don't really-
Of course, but they do give recommendations to the ICC, The Hague in the Netherlands. They do to some extent have ties with other organizations. Yeah.
I feel good there's like I did Amnesty International, like there's nothing they can really do because they're a non-government entity. All they can do is like try to raise awareness of it, and that actually does a lot.
Well, I'll tell you this. A president, he might be the authority of a country, but his field of specialty isn't on judging other people. Amnesty International, they are experts in the law. They're experts in giving recommendations. So I would have to disagree with you, because the president must, to some extent, follow the recommendations of other organizations. So there is lobbying involved, so it is very effective in some cases. Yeah?
Just sort of on the side with what they've been talking about, the Human Rights Watch and also its sister group, Amnesty International, you said that they give recommendations to the Hague when they're involved in a situation, but how influential are they that the Hague would actually listen to the recommendations?
Well, even if the Hague,
They wouldn't
well,
listen.
first of all, even if the Hague does, in itself give something, a recommendation or a speech of itself, it wouldn't be effective too, because there's some countries that don't even recognize the ICC in the first place. So I would consider them to be influential, because they are the countries that they are the organization which usually get on the ground on certain situations or disasters or whether it's a war. So they are the first ones to get on the ground. They were the first ones to get in foot on the Gazan war, which occurred in just 2 years ago. So they were able to give the first reporting, and they're able to basically collect evidence to give it to the ICC. So they do give ease of passage for ICC to access information. Yeah.
Where do you see the organization in the near future? Do you see them prevailing more? Do you see them diminishing?
It's hard to say, because we have to determine how powerful presidents are and how powerful Human Rights Watch is. Human Rights Watch, they're not going to, I really don't see much of a bright future for them. I think that they're just going to stay like, to some extent, the level that they are right now. But they will continue to be very active, very critical.
I see. Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Good
No,
job.
pretty much.
I think I'm done.
Great. That was 15 minutes.